welcome to Press Conference. I'm your host, Jim DeLorenzo, the principal of Jim DeLorenzo Public Relations. You can find me online at jimdelorenzo.com. A reminder that I'm always available to answer your questions about public relations, how it works, what it is, how it can help you. Please feel free to email me at jim@jhdenterprises.com, contact me through LinkedIn, or on Twitter, where my handle is @jhd16. In my public relations career, I've had the good fortune to meet many interesting people: athletes, entrepreneurs, reporters, coaches, authors, executives, editors, entertainers, and innovators. My guest today is Dr. Laura Sicola, a leadership communication expert, executive coach, trainer, and speaker. Dr. Sicola's programs turn leaders into master influencers who maximize positive results. She has worked with leaders of Fortune 500 companies, nonprofit organizations, and governments on 5 continents. Her TEDx talk, Want to Sound Like a Leader, has over 5 million views. Her new book, Speaking to Influence, Mastering Your Leadership Voice, will be available this coming April 16th. Dr. Sicola, Laura, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
When I first met you here in the RVNTV studios a few months back. And what fascinated me about our conversation that day and our subsequent conversations is you have gone on an interesting career path to get to where you are today. And what you're doing career-wise is very interesting to me. But I wanted to share with our viewers how you got to where you are today. Now, I know that you spent some time as a teacher and as an educator, but how did you go into that field and then move on to this probably a new area for a lot of people to understand?
Sure. I think life, part of what makes the career journey interesting is because you don't necessarily know when the turns are going to come. Life doesn't give you a GPS. You just suddenly find yourself at this giant fork.
That's true.
And I did start out as a public school teacher. I was teaching in South Central Los Angeles, as a matter of fact, so the inner city, and saw myself being in the education world, just wasn't quite sure in what capacity. I didn't see it as being a long-term, traditional classroom kind of a role. So I moved to Philadelphia. I was living in Japan at the time and teaching there as well, and I moved to Philadelphia to do my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania with the intention of being faculty. I thought, okay, I want to train teachers. That seemed like something that was a good idea. But while I never ever wanted to go to grad school, and the irony is that I went back 3 times between going back for my teaching credential and then the master's in education, and then eventually realizing if I want to train teachers, that means I have to teach in a university, and that means I have to get a PhD. So here I am. And the funny thing is, I remember at my bachelor's degree graduation ceremony, I remember seeing the PhD students walking up there with their little beanies and the long robes and thinking to myself, you guys are nuts. There's no way. You could not pay me enough money to do that and be a student for that long.
Sure.
And lo and behold, with each career decision I made, I realized, oh, I'm going to need to go back and get that or get that. And 3 years, not 3 years, but 3 twists later, suddenly I'm here with the little beanie hat.
Isn't that interesting, though, that you had that visual of, I never want to do that.
I remember the words literally, you guys are nuts.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then there you are a few years later.
With the rest of
Now, was it a challenge for you to decide on what to get your PhD in?
That part was easier because I knew it was going to be in education, and I knew that language and communication was my real niche. It was about training language teachers, training teachers to work with students who didn't necessarily speak English fluently, even though you're teaching math or teaching whatever it was. So I speak Spanish, I spoke Japanese, a little on the rusty side now, but the language and communication piece was always where the gravitation was. So Penn had a great program in educational linguistics, and I got to do lots of research on cognitive processing in language development, lots of work on understanding how people learn languages, lots of understanding about the different kinds of factors from a cultural perspective, whether it's cultural in the sense of what country you're from, what language you speak, or whether you're firstborn or lastborn, how all of those little details influence the way that we choose to frame what we say and how we interpret what we think other people mean by what we hear them say. And that's usually where all the challenge comes from in miscommunication, right?
Sure.
Why is there a difference between what you think you say and what I think I hear? That's where it all comes from. And so I got to study a lot of that on a very scientific and cognitive level. And the detour came closer to the end of, towards graduation, when I realized, frankly, what the tenure track was really like. I'm not a publish or perish kind of researcher. I do the research, but I love the teaching part. And I realized there were like 200 applicants for every job. And they were in places I didn't really want to teach. I'm a city girl. I need concrete.
Right.
I need Chinese takeout. All those kinds of things. So moving out to the middle of nowhere was just not going to work for me.
Understood.
So there was an opportunity that sort of fell into my lap almost. I was sitting this close to someone at a wedding reception who worked for IBM in one of the top ranks. And we were chatting about all this learning and cultural bits. And he said to me straight out, I've always had an interest in this, and I think it's really relevant to my people. Would you be interested, and do you think you could come and do a training for us?
Okay.
And lo and behold, I had my first consulting gig, and it was
with IBM.
And it was with IBM, not too shabby for somebody who had no business background, no intention, wasn't pitching anything. And something relatively similar happened about a month later with Chase. And I thought to myself, hey, is that all it takes to land Fortune 100 companies?
Right.
How hard can this entrepreneur thing be?
I'm starting a business, yeah.
Right. And it was fun, it was challenging, it was lucrative, it was autonomous, it was everything that I wanted. I stayed teaching at Penn for about 6 or 8 more years while I was building my company. But overall, and that was terrific, because I still was training teachers and doing the things that I loved, doing the research that I liked. But the autonomy, and I was hooked as an entrepreneur, and that's where it all started.
And there was a real world application off campus,
Correct.
Beyond the campus, that you could see a need for that.
Yes.
And when you saw that need, what was it that took it to the next level for you, that you said, okay, I'm going to stop teaching for a while on campus. I'm going to devote myself full time to being an entrepreneur, a consultant. What was the turning point there?
That was an easy one.
Okay.
And frankly, as the business grew, one of the challenges of teaching in a traditional context is that the schedule is very fixed. If you have to be in that place every Tuesday at 4 o'clock or whatever time it is, that's not negotiable. You can't say, well, let's have class tomorrow instead, or can we put it off for a week, or have it at 8 a.m. instead. And as the business part was expanding, people would say, can you come and do a training here? Can you come speak at a conference there? And if it was on a Tuesday, I had to say no. And frankly, if it was on a Monday or a Wednesday, sometimes I'd have to say no, because if you need to travel to California or someplace else, you can't get there on the day that you need to travel if you have to be in class.
Right.
And I just thought, it has served me very well. I'm so glad I was able to contribute in that academic context, but now it's a question of, it's going to hold my business back way too much. And I was turning down really great contracts and opportunities because I had to teach the classes, and it was time to move on.
Yeah. So that was kind of an inflection point for you, where you said, I've got to commit one way or the other.
Yes. Yeah, you really do. And you can't live on a part-time teaching salary. That's not an option. And I didn't want to let go of the business. I spent a lot of time building it at that point. But you have to sort of think, for as much as I love it, what was it doing for me, and what was I trying to contribute? And I realized on both fronts, I think I've given as much to this field in this context as I can give, and I have definitely received from it what I need to receive. I mean, when you're starting to launch a business, you need just enough stability that you can keep the lights on, and you can keep your basic expenses met. But it also helped because nobody knew who Laura Sicola was, but to be able to say I'm faculty at Penn. It's one thing to say I have my PhD from Penn. Okay, that's a nice little feather in the cap, the little credibility marker. But to say I'm faculty there, then they go, oh, Penn pays you. Oh, okay, well, if they pay you, then maybe you're kind of smart after all. We'll give you a try.
Yeah.
Right. So, but after enough time, that would always still be on the resume as having taught there for 10 years and still being connected with them on a variety of levels, but it wasn't going to get bigger.
Right.
So it gave me what I needed, and now Penn's a client, which is even more fun.
That's fantastic. So you're teaching teachers techniques and skills to make them better communicators.
Yes, and a lot of that, yes.
And then you transfer that into the business world. What was the first thing that you encountered? What was the challenge for IBM that they said, I want to engage you?
For IBM, it was because it wasn't so much about teaching per se, but it was about the intercultural communications piece. Okay. So just as context, as I mentioned, my first teaching job was in South Central Los Angeles. All my students, all the families in that neighborhood were Latino. So it was Spanish-English bilingual, and the cultural piece was enormous.
Sure.
Moved from there to Japan, teaching in the Japanese context. Again, the culture and language piece was what framed everything that we did. Right. And then when I moved to Penn, when I moved to Philadelphia, I had a teaching fellowship, and I worked with international students at the university, at the English language programs, students who were there to improve their English, their business English, their academic English. These are all adults from age 20 on through whatever, right. Whether they were sent by their governments, whether they were sent by their companies, whether they just came on their own volition because they wanted better opportunities and they knew they had to really, really sharpen their communication skills in English. Sometimes it was spouses of international faculty who were in these programs, and every 8 weeks I would get a new cohort coming in, and I was working with them teaching everything from business English and presentation skills to pronunciation to diplomacy and everything that you would really need. And when you start, once you've worked with enough cohorts of people every 8 weeks for 6 or 7 years, you start to get a pretty good sense of what commonalities are out there, what challenges are out there, whether they're aiming for business success, for academic success, for social integration success, whether they're from China or from Russia or from India or from Argentina. There are differences among each, but there are also a lot of similarities. So when IBM said, can you come and do a training on intercultural communication in the global workplace? I thought, sure, I just lived it for the last 6 years, except they all came to me. And so they flew in, meaning the IBM flew in their worldwide leadership team leaders from about 60 or 70 different spots around the world. Everybody flew in for a 2-day retreat, and I led day one.
Well, that's interesting. That's phenomenal.
It was all about the intercultural component to communication in the workplace.
Wow. I want to continue our conversation. I have to take a brief time out for some messages. We'll be right back.
For less than the cost of a newspaper, direct mail, or a magazine ad, you can leave our studio and within 48 hours have a permanent digital copy of your live segment to link to your social media, embed into your company website, or use in email marketing. Investing in your brand is so very important, and we can't wait to have you as a guest.
Shelter dogs aren't broken. They've simply experienced more life. If they were human, we would call them wise. They would be the ones with tales to tell and stories to write, the ones dealt a bad hand who responded with courage. Do not pity a shelter dog. Adopt one.
Say we've got grit, and we'll take it as a compliment. Because it's our uncommon drive, our spark within, that brings us together and sets us apart. We are temple made. And when others take shortcuts, when others take breaks, when others take the easy way, we take charge.
I work 13 hours a day, 6 days a week. So when I'm off the clock, I gotta get stuff done. So when I need a snack, I need something healthy, tasty, and easy to eat. Like wonderful pistachios without the shells. They're protein-powered, delicious, and great on the go. And that's perfect for me. Thanks, Liz. A woman without a lot of time.
Whether you're a gourmet cook or just want to eat like one, visit Rostelli Market Fresh, your home for the freshest, locally sourced ingredients to please everyone who loves great food. Our organic meats, quality seafood, and free-range poultry are cut fresh to order. Chefs create culinary-inspired prep foods made fresh every day, which pair nicely with our vast selection of fine wines and spirits. Choose from handmade pastas, artisan cheeses, organic...
Hey, welcome back to Press Conference on RVNTV. I'm your host, Jim DeLorenzo, and my guest today is Dr. Laura Sicola from Vocal Impact Productions. And we were talking about the start of your business practice, your entrepreneur business, the aspect of intercultural relations and communications. And I know that's very fascinating, and I don't want to leave our viewers with the impression that that's all you do. Because I think over the last few years you've redefined yourself a number of times, and like any good business person, you redefine yourself every couple of years to accommodate changes in the workplace. How did you pivot from what you were doing early in your entrepreneurial career to what you're doing today? And I'm fascinated by the topic of influence. As a public relations person, I try to find stories that can influence people's hearts and minds.
Sure.
But how do you work with influence? What is the new thing that you are doing at Vocal Impact Productions?
About 6 years ago is when I did make that final shift, rebranding as Vocal Impact Productions, and the focus really is leadership, communication, and influence. And the catalyst for that, very simply, of all things, I read Lean In.
Okay.
The book by Sheryl Sandberg.
Sure.
And I don't remember why. I think I saw her TED Talk and was kind of curious, so I read it. And I remember being surprised, frankly, because again, I'm not a corporate person. So I was a teacher, I was an academic, and when I read it, I thought, really? Is this true, what she's saying? So I started at all the different networking events I would attend. I would straw poll women and say, did you read it? What'd you think? And it was very clear that I was in the minority. I'd been living under some sort of a rock for a while and was unaware of the fact that every other woman out there, maybe they didn't love everything that she said, but they clearly agreed, yes, she's correct in these issues with regard to gender discrepancies in the workplace. And a lot of the women felt frustrated that they weren't being heard, they weren't having the influence they wanted, they weren't getting recognized for their skills, for their leadership abilities, et cetera. And so I thought, well, since my work was really so much in the communication world, and I did a lot of work in pronunciation and articulation and the way you project, except I just did it with a smaller niche group, the international professionals who are non-native speakers, there's no reason I couldn't do that same thing for native speakers.
Right.
And so I said to them, do you think there'd be an interest in maybe a vocal empowerment for women workshop or something like that? And hands down, the whole group just went, wait, when are you going to hold that? Where? Do I need to buy a ticket? How do I get in? And I was like, oh,
I haven't
okay.
even got this
yeah,
yet,
exactly.
but that's
Like
an
that was a
idea.
hypothetical question, but clearly, if a market tells you what they want to start giving you money for as an entrepreneur, unless you're an idiot, you find a way to provide it to them.
Right.
So that was the trigger. And about 6 weeks later, I relaunched as Vocal Impact Productions, did my first event, and it has been that focus ever since. Mind you, about 20 minutes after I did that first program, the guys were like, yeah, we're not so good at it either. So we stopped, we didn't worry so much about it being just about women, that was the catalyst, but now it is more about leadership in general, and what is it about the way that you communicate that takes you from being just the brains behind the operation to someone who's the face and the voice in front of it and able to really get others on board with your vision to make it happen.
And that's interesting, getting people on board,
Yes.
because I'm focused in many of my interactions with my clients about getting other people to buy in to what they're discussing, what they're talking about. If you would, tell me about one of your recent projects as how you've shown people how to vocalize, speak effectively, and communicate their point of view that influences somebody to join their team or join their cause.
One of the big questions you have to ask when you're trying to have that impact on somebody is to ask yourself what qualities, knowing who your audience is, and by audience I mean could be one person, right? What qualities do they need to see in you to buy into you as somebody whose vision they could get on board with in the first place. So in a particular context, knowing what your reputation is, knowing what their reputation is, et cetera, do you need to come across as someone who is authoritative, as someone who is easygoing and approachable, as someone who is very matter of fact, very direct, just gonna get down to business and move on, or as somebody who's a lot of fun.
Right.
It could be a combination thereof, but you know, or you need to know who your audience is, and then figure out what messenger are they most likely to listen to in delivering that message.
Okay.
Right. So in this case, we're having a conversation, right? It's a TV show. People want to hear some interesting stories. So we're going for a combination of authoritative, because hey, it's my business, but also approachable, fun, kind of interesting.
Right. 'Cause if somebody wants to engage with you, they know that they can approach you and say, I have this question in my mind.
Right, and you're going for the same thing. Be somebody who's a really engaging host so that people want to keep tuning in to see who else you'll be talking to. But it's very different from if you're going to be one of these kind of people.
Yeah.
And so for some clients, sometimes it's the opposite issue where they are fine when they are talking. So there's one woman, I'll call her Janet, and she was a great leader. She's an upper level manager, and she knew her stuff cold, but she wasn't quite getting to the next step. She kept getting passed over. Fortune 100 company, and we realized that when she was speaking, even on the phone with higher ups, there was that constant fear of needing to prove herself and to try to make sure she was doing everything right, and that it was, and when she was coming across as kind of frantic because she never stopped to take a breath, among other things. She was talking too fast, and she only had a few minutes because everything was really, time sensitive because it's the higher ups and they only have a short attention span along with a really tight schedule.
I see what you're doing there.
Yeah, thank you. I'll stop and breathe now. And in realizing that, it's like, even though she had the content and the expertise to do the more executive role successfully, what people were seeing was this frantic, not authoritative, not leadership, not executive presence coming at them. It's like, I'm not sure she can handle it yet.
Sure.
So when she learned to stop, and she'd make a point and finish it, put a period, drop the voice, period, space, start the next sentence. And she was able to slow things down. I don't mean slow down the whole sentence, but get to the end of a point and stop. Let it sit, and then move on. And when she was able to do that, it was like she suddenly owned her space. And those little bits make a huge difference in how people receive you, how they perceive you, and as a result, how they register what you're saying and how they judge you as a result. And 4 months later, she got that VP position.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
I know when I do some media training for my clients, one of the things I often talk about is taking a moment, pause, reflect, make eye contact if possible, if you're in the room with somebody, or look around the room and make eye contact with other people in the room, but to have that presence of mind to kind of stop and absorb the information and not blurt it out. And I think that's a great way that you described it, and I think that I've seen people who do that. One of the things I like to tell my clients is to watch TV news. Watch these panel shows. Watch, whatever your political point of view is, watch CNN, watch MSNBC, watch Fox, and see how the guests on the shows talk and how they respond to questions, how they position themselves. Are they comfortable? Do they look like how is their appearance? How is their overall tone? And identify with somebody that you can say, oh, I want to emulate that style.
Yeah.
I apologize. I have a lot I'd love to talk with you about. I'd like to ask you to come back another time if I could.
I'd love to.
Tell me a little bit about the book. The book is coming out April 16th.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about the book before we break for today.
Sure. The book is called Speaking to Influence, Mastering Your Leadership Voice. So it's helping you to identify how you want to be seen as a leader, recognizing the gap between how you want to come across, how you think you come across, and how you actually come across, because that gap is your blind spot, and you will keep tripping over that blind spot until you're able to identify and close it. Because when you're able then to come across the way you want to come across, and if everybody recognizes you as that person, that's when you're going to get ahead and have the influence that you want. And that's what the book helps you to do.
Interesting. Well, the book is available for pre-order on Amazon.com right now. It's called Speaking to Influence, Mastering Your Leadership Voice. Dr. Laura Sicola. Laura, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
It's been a great pleasure. I look forward to hearing from you. Let me know if you have any questions about today's show, if you have any questions about public relations in general. If you'd like to get in touch with Dr. Sicola, let me know. My email is jim@jhdenterprises.com. My phone number is 215-266-5943. Always looking forward to hearing from you, and thank you for watching Press Conference today.